In the United States, a civil war has broken out, and the country is divided. Texas and California have seceded and formed a militia called the WF, or Western Forces, while Florida has created its own alliance, and the government, led by a president in his third term, is fighting against these secessionist groups. The president frequently appears on TV, claiming that victory is near thanks to the support of the loyalist states, but no one believes him. Many think it's only a matter of time before the WF reaches Washington, D.C. Lee, a war photographer, watches one of these speeches from her hotel room in New York and even takes a photo of the TV. Suddenly, she notices a bombing happening in the middle of the city. The next day, Lee and her journalist colleague, Joel, head downtown by car to cover a protest. People are begging for water, and the situation is tense. They are given fluorescent vests to identify themselves as press, and Lee walks into the crowd to take pictures. Things quickly turn violent when the police try to push the protesters back, but the crowd fights back. He continues to take pictures, unfazed by the chaos, but a young photographer named Jessie gets hit. Lee pulls her to safety and discovers that Jessie is a fan of her work. Lee gives Jessie her vest and notices an armed woman running through the crowd carrying an American flag. Sensing danger, Lee pushes Jessie to the ground just before a bomb explodes, killing most of the protesters. Jessie is left in shock. Jessie forces herself to take a photo too, determined not to be seen as weak. Later, at a hotel where journalists are staying, Lee and Joel discuss their next steps with their mentor, Sammy. Lee tries to upload her pictures, though the internet is painfully slow due to the war. There are rumors of a big attack planned for July 4th to make a statement, but they're unsure if they believe it. The power goes out, which is a frequent issue since the war began. Though the hotel has a generator to handle it, Sammy learns that Lee and Joel are planning to drive through war zones to reach Washington, D.C. not to cover the front lines, but to get the president's last interview, which hasn't happened in over a year. Reporters are often shot on sight if they approach the White House. Sammy thinks the plan is crazy, but Lee suspects he secretly wants to go to D.C. as well. However, Sammy admits he actually wants to go to Charlottesville, Virginia, where the front lines are, and he needs a ride. Lee and Joel are concerned that Sammy is too old to keep up, but in the end, Lee agrees to take him along. Later, as Lee heads to her room, the receptionist reminds her that the power outages make using the elevator risky. Jessie approaches Lee to thank her for saving her life and tries to return the vest, but Lee tells her to keep it and advises her. Jessie admits she's just starting out as a war photographer and looks up to Lee as a role model. That night, Lee tries to relax by taking a bath, but she's haunted by the horrific scenes of death and destruction she's witnessed in her career. She's seen torture and brutality, and while she captured it all on camera, she couldn't help the victims. The next morning, the group gets ready to leave, and Lee is shocked to see that Jessie has joined them in the car. Lee argues with Joel, who points out that she's being hypocritical. She's fine with bringing Sammy, who can't run if they're in danger, yet she's against Jessie coming along. Realizing she has no good counter-arguments, Lee agrees to let Jessie join them, but insists that they'll drop her off with Sammy in Charlottesville. As they drive out of the city, Sammy advises Jessie to stay alert. The roads are filled with abandoned and wrecked cars, so they have to maneuver carefully. They reach a military checkpoint where soldiers check their press credentials before allowing them to pass. During the drive, Sammy and Joel talk about the questions Joel should ask during the interview with the president, touching on controversial topics like disbanding the FBI and using airstrikes against American citizens. Eventually, they come across a gas station guarded by 3 armed men. Desperate for fuel, they stop and negotiate. At first, the men refuse to share, but they agree when Lee offers to pay extra in Canadian currency. While the tank is being filled, Jessie notices something in the distance and goes to investigate, with one of the armed men following her. Lee, worried, follows them and finds Jessie horrified at the sight of 2 men hanging by their wrists, badly tortured but still alive. The armed man explains they were looters. Back on the road, Jessie is upset that she didn't take any pictures and wonders if she should have done something to help. The others explain that as a journalist, she'll face even worse situations, and she has to get used to it. Jessie is overwhelmed and cries, but she vows to be braver moving forward. As the group continues their journey, they listen to more hollow speeches from the president on the radio and witness the destruction surrounding them. There are dead bodies everywhere. Eventually, something catches Lee's eye, and she asks Joel to stop the car. Lee takes Jessie to a crashed helicopter, encouraging her to take some compelling pictures. Jessie, feeling like a burden, apologizes and explains that the old camera she's using once belonged to her father. Lee is hiding at his farm, pretending everything is normal, which bothers Jessie. She wonders if Lee would photograph her if she got shot, but Lee doesn't give her a clear answer. Later that evening, the group stops to rest. While watching distant gunfire, Lee reflects on how she used to cover wars to warn people, but now the violence is right in front of them. Sammy realizes that Lee is losing faith in journalism, which is why she's been so tough on Jessie. Meanwhile, Joel comforts Jessie, telling her it's normal if she can't sleep after what she saw. They all sleep outside like campers. The next day, the group goes to where they saw the gunfire the night before. Lee and Jessie take many pictures as 2 groups fire at each other, with the man caught in the middle. Someone throws a smoke grenade to help him, but when the man tries to run, He gets shot. His team pulls him to safety and tries to treat his wound, but the man keeps bleeding and dies. Jesse captures the entire event with her camera. The team enters a nearby building and the journalists follow. Inside, they find a wounded man begging for help, but he's shot dead before they can do anything. Jesse watches, stunned, as the soldiers finish clearing the building. By the end of it, Joel is casually laughing with a soldier as if it's just another day. The soldiers capture some enemies and take them for execution, which Jesse also photographs. Later, the group arrives at a refugee camp, but there's no room in the tents, so they sleep in their car. Jesse continues bonding with Lee while developing her photos. Lee tells Jesse that her own parents are also hiding on a farm, pretending the war isn't happening. Jesse feels disappointed with her photos at first, but Lee reminds her that only 1 out of 30 pictures is usually good. Jesse eventually finds an impressive shot of the dying man, and Lee praises her work. That night, they relax with other refugees before going back to the horrors of war the next morning. As they continue their journey, Jesse takes more pictures, sometimes putting her friends' faces on the scenes of destruction for a more personal touch. Eventually, they arrive at a town that seems peaceful, with people casually strolling on the streets, unaffected by the war. They stop at a clothing store, and the clerk explains that the town has chosen to ignore the war. Jesse convinces Lee to try on a dress, teasing her about how she looks and taking a picture of Lee's rare smile. Soon after, they come across an abandoned circus with a dead man in the road. Lee scans the area with her camera zoom lens but doesn't spot anyone. Joel decides to keep driving, but their window is shot as they pass through the entrance arch. Joel speeds up, driving over the body and finding a safe spot near a truck. There, they meet 2 soldiers, hiding and waiting for a shooter to show himself. The journalists move around to document the scene, but the shooter misses his shot at them. Jesse and Lee take pictures while Joel tries to interview the soldiers, but they don't belong to any side, they're just 2 guys trying to survive. Eventually, the shooter is taken down and the group moves on. Later, they notice a car speeding toward them, making them nervous. Lee slows down to let it pass, but it turns out to be a prank from Tony and Bohai, fellow journalists and friends of Joel. Tony reveals that Joel got drunk and told him where they were headed. He also shares that Joel made a move on Jesse. Tony is so excited to see them that he jumps into their car through the window, prompting Jesse to try the same, switching cars with Tony. Bohai, who likes Jesse more than Tony, speeds off with her. Lee is anxious, especially when they lose sight of Bohai's car. Suddenly, a military vehicle rushes past them, and Lee has to swerve off the road to avoid a crash, stopping just before hitting a tree. They get back on the road and find Bohai's car abandoned near a farm with its doors wide open. Investigating further, they discover that Bohai and Jesse have been captured by loyalist gunmen who are executing people and dumping bodies into a mass grave. Sammy notes that these aren't regular soldiers, but Joel remains hopeful, thinking their press IDs will protect them. Lee, Joel, and Tony approach the gunmen, explaining that Bohai and Jesse are part of their journalist group and that they're heading to Charlottesville to cover a story about a university reopening. Without warning, the head gunman shoots Bohai, leaving Jesse in shock and Tony in tears. The gunman asks where they're from, and when Tony says he's from Hong Kong, he gets shot too. Chaos erupts as Sammy suddenly appears in the car and rams into the soldiers, knocking them into the grave. Jesse accidentally falls and has to climb over a huge pile of bodies to get out. Joel helps her and the group gets back into the car, ignoring a gunman who shoots at them as they drive away. On the road, Jesse and Joel both break down emotionally, and Jesse even throws up. They've barely gone a mile or two when Sammy says he can't drive anymore, and they realize he's been shot. They move him to the back seat, and Joel takes the wheel, speeding through a burning forest. They eventually arrive at the WF military base in Charlottesville, which has a flag with only 2 stars. Sadly, Sammy dies, and as Joel screams in frustration, the soldiers take Sammy's body away in a box. Lee looks at a picture she took of dead Sammy, but she deletes it. Soon after, they hear from journalist friends that most of the loyalists have surrendered, leaving DC mostly undefended except for a few remaining soldiers. The president's death is expected, which ruins their chances of getting the interview they wanted. Joel is angry because he feels Sammy's death was for nothing. Lee and Jesse take a moment to grieve, and Jesse admits that although she's been terrified these past few days, she's also never felt more alive. Later, as Lee washes Sammy's blood off the car, the trio decides to stay with the WF soldiers to cover their attack on the White House. Although most loyalists have given up, there are still enough to keep fighting on the streets. The WF attacks the Lincoln Memorial, and the journalists follow the soldiers closely. Jesse's taking powerful pictures, but Lee freezes up due to her PTSD. Joel helps her snap out of it as a tank and a helicopter clear the way ahead. The soldiers take positions on rooftops to set up a defense line, and the journalists hide behind an armored car to keep documenting the action. Suddenly, an explosion causes the armored car to roll away, forcing the group to run and find cover. Jesse lags behind because she keeps taking photos, including one of a man on fire. She also captures images of a tank breaking down the White House wall. Lee is still struggling and crying, but Joel keeps pushing her to keep moving. Nearby, another journalist and her cameraman are filming the entire event. They soon spot Secret Service agents taking the president out of the White House and putting him into a car. 3 cars leave, but when they crash in the streets, soldiers surround them and shoot everyone inside. Jesse snaps more pictures, but Lee suspects this is just a decoy and pulls her friends toward the White House to find the real president. Some soldiers notice and follow them. Inside the White House, they find a few bodies, but not much else. Soldiers begin searching the building and eventually find an agent surrendering in the conference room. Jesse and Lee take pictures as the agent explains that she wants to negotiate the president's surrender and send him to a neutral country. However, the soldiers shoot her and continue their search. More secret agents open fire in the hallways, and the journalists keep taking photos of the chaos. The soldiers fight their way through several rooms, killing loyalists without mercy. When they reach a hallway at the back, Jesse stands in the open to get a picture, and Lee jumps in front of her just as an enemy soldier opens fire. Lee is shot to death right in front of Jesse, who, despite being in shock, takes pictures of Lee's death. Joel snaps Jesse out of it and urges her to keep moving toward the Oval Office. There, the soldiers have the president surrounded. Before they shoot him, Joel asks them to wait for a quote. The president pleads, "Don't let them kill me." We're satisfied with that. Joel allows the soldiers to execute the president, marking the end of the war. Jesse's final photo is of the soldiers posing next to the president's body, as if it were a trophy. Subscribe for popcorn. We are racing towards 1,000 subscribers.